Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic, sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. I invite you to scroll through my catalog of more than 130 awesome interviews and follow us on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Every episode is unique, inspiring, engaging, and meaningful. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in AA. And if you like what you hear, you can leave a rating and review at Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Today is an encore episode of my interview with Jimmy S. from April 2021. My guest on today's show, Jimmy S., found the active alcoholic's pot of gold. After a difficult adolescence, prison sentence, and series of dead-end jobs, Jimmy was hired by a California winery, where he worked for over 20 years. This dream job not only allowed him to drink on the job, but actually required it. His job as a wine salesman necessitated intimate knowledge of every bottle he sold and daily drinking with customers. Thus, Jimmy's longtime alcoholism and drug abuse was fueled by the demands of his job. Then came his downward spiral, replete with divorces, physical decline, drunk driving, and mental issues. Fortunately, as the bottom approached, he had a moment of clarity, found AA, and has sustained sobriety since that time. Ironically, when he got sober and informed his employer, he was fired for not agreeing to drink on the job. As a former functional alcoholic, this was another gift he could not ignore. Over his more than 20 years of sobriety, Jimmy has parlayed that experience into a strong program centered in constant service to the fellowship and helping people in his own community. Though I only met Jimmy about a year ago on Zoom, we formed an instant bond based on a shared love for Alcoholics Anonymous and our mutual willingness to help others. I've been fascinated by his story and feel like I've known him for years. I think you'll feel that way too over the next hour as you listen to this AA Recovery interview with my AA brother, Jimmy S.
Hi, I'm Jimmy. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jimmy. That's exactly right. I knew you were because you're here today with me. You and I met. We were part of the American invasion of the English Zoom AA meetings. That's where you and I met, was at a London-based Zoom meeting. And it was so cool to meet a fellow American in that meeting, and you and I have gotten to be regulars there. So how has Zoom kind of changed your life?
Zoom for me has opened up a whole world to me.
Has it?
It's bumped my sobriety and my involvement with Alcoholics Anonymous up about 300%.
Really?
For a variety of reasons. One, because where I live, there were only a couple of live meetings. Seeing the same people over and over again.
Yeah.
It stopped feeling like it was about sobriety, and it was more like a little club.
Yeah.
That's the best way to put it. I need a little more varied recovery and a little more mix of new and old and everything in between.
Yeah.
I was going to meetings, but attending mentally kind of perfunctory.
Yeah.
I just sort of showed up and trying to get involved, but not feeling the connection that I had felt previously in other places where I lived. So Zoom gave me the opportunity to, like you said, start branching out. And I've got to be honest, I think I like it better than a live meeting.
Yeah, you know what I like better is than not having to get in my car and drive, because I don't know how many tens of thousands of miles I put on a year going to 6 or 7 meetings a week, but all of them are across town. So we're talking a half hour there, a half hour back. But I know what you're talking about with those smaller meetings. They get so small that you can tell the other guy's story for him. It's always nice to be able to get into some new meetings. That's what I found with Zoom, too. It's kept everything fresher, and we're really blessed to be able to have that technology. So you're an alcoholic. What's your sobriety date, and how long have you been sober?
My sobriety date is October 19, 1999. 21 years. I'm coming up on 22 if I don't get drunk between now and October. I didn't get here until I was almost 50.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, I guess I was lucky in that it stuck
mm-hmm.
for whatever reason the first time.
Yeah.
And I think it really primarily was because alcohol stopped working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you weren't getting a relief and you're still drinking like a fish, you start going, well, this isn't working out.
Yeah.
You know, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. You quit because alcohol stopped working. When did it start working for you? I mean, when did you first encounter alcohol in your life?
The first time I had a drink, I snuck a couple of warm beers of my grandmother and my uncle's house. And it tasted terrible.
Yeah.
But I drank one and felt pretty good, so I figured two would be even better. That was the first time, and I didn't drink much of that. Nobody in my immediate family drank. There was no alcohol in our house. I guess because it was mysterious, and as a kid, you know, after eventually you go over to a friend's house, and they do that horrible thing where you raid the parents' liquor cabinet and pour a little bit of everything into a glass. And then drink that and then laugh and have a great time and then throw up and be horribly sick and confused.
I get that.
I did that a bunch of times.
Yeah, and you couldn't wait to do it again, I'll bet, huh?
But, there was no deterrent there. Let's put it that way.
No obstacles in the way of drinking whenever you wanted.
Well, if you could figure out a way to get to alcohol, I was happy to drink it, And of course, the time period when I was, was doing this I was in the 60s, and in some ways, for a while there, it was more about, smoking pot and taking drugs than alcohol, because in some ways those things were easier to get. I didn't have to go to a store and get somebody to buy it for me. I could buy it from a guy on the corner. So, I had all that involvement as well, which I think, it's just, I don't think it's a gateway like they talk about going the other way, but I think it predisposed me to try things to alter the way that I felt and to change my being and my perception, because I always felt a little squirrely, like, I wanted something, but I didn't know what I wanted.
Yeah. Is this from the time you were a kid you were feeling that way, or when did that feeling kind of come in?
When I was really, young, probably, up till about fourth or fifth grade, I was trying to be normal. I craved attention, and I found that I could get more attention by being bad than I could by being good. And for some reason, I didn't mind the consequences once they were over, and when you were bad, getting in trouble, once the shit died down, it was like, pretty cool. So people could at least look at me like, whoa, he's reckless or he's fearless, I always had this sort of dysmorphic sense of myself, I joined the gang when I was 12. I was the only member because I didn't like meetings, and we always did what I wanted. Yeah. And I literally would sneak out the house every night, put my leather jacket on, grab some smokes, and go out in the town. And in my mind, I was James Dean in the Wild Ones. But the reality was I looked like Ralphie from A Christmas Story. I was a chubby little kid with glasses.
Yeah.
So, that disconnect was always there from the very beginning, the difference between perception and reality, and always trying to be something that I wasn't, or trying to be something that I thought I wanted to be, or something I needed to be. And I developed those skills. I rode with them for quite a while.
Were they attractive to other people, or did they keep people away from you? I mean, that being a bad guy, there's always guys who want to follow that guy, and being the funny, clowny guy like I was when I was a kid. There were always kids wanting me to be the guy who got into trouble, but it was always funny, and there were always people around to support me in that. Where did you fall in that group?
I was still, for a long time, really a loner, up until I got out of junior high. But I had a couple of friends. I would rather spend time by myself. Really? Yeah, I was in Cub Scouts, and that was kind of fun. And then I became a Boy Scout. I got kicked out of the Boy Scouts because I took a group of young scouts out on what was supposed to be a 3-hour hike and came back about 15 hours later and looking like the Lost Patrol. And, we had found some beer and cigarettes. Anyway, it was suggested to me that I might want to not come back. And, the reality of it was I didn't want to be there anyway.
I get it.
It wasn't working for me. I had always been out there running around by myself, doing whatever I wanted to do, whenever I wanted to do it.
Now, when you were by yourself, were you drinking or smoking pot or doing any of that other stuff? Or were those activities you did more with other people?
I started smoking pot. I actually started smoking cigarettes before I smoked anything. When I went to junior high, I guess it was 7th grade, we took a bus. The bus, it was about a 2-mile ride. And I would walk that 2 miles for the 30 seconds that the bus went by. And they could see me smoking a cigarette looking like a badass. Yeah. You know what I mean? That 30 seconds of that little performance, there he is, he's smoking, and then I'd have to walk 2 miles to school every day. Somehow made sense. I think about it now and I go, but you're an idiot. There was a little bit of drinking in those days, but I was just more out misbehaving. I had trouble with the juvenile hall, and I had trouble where I lived. There were alleys, and you could get on these fences and walk these alleys for blocks and blocks. And I could see into everybody's backyard and into their house. So, I'd be checking out, well, what's going on in your house? Because I wasn't interested in what was going on in my house.
Yeah.
What's happening in your house? Why is it different? And then, of course, those sort of things morphed to, well, it's nice to look at your house and see your stuff. Maybe it'd be better if I was in your house with your stuff, and of course that was, then the logical conclusion was, well, I'm already here. I might as well take some of your stuff. Yeah. So I got a lot of trouble. And in fact, we had to move because I robbed the vice principal of the high school's house and got caught. And my parents felt that it would be a great idea if I didn't go to that high school.
That sounds like a pretty drastic consequence, but what were the consequences of that beyond just moving? Did you get into trouble with the law or kicked out of school? What was going on there?
I had a lot of suspensions. I had all those things going on. And I went to court and was on juvenile probation for a while. And my father used to take me by the juvenile facility, like a little mini prison, with barbed wire and stuff, and he would threaten me. He says, you're going to wind up there. And instead of being terrified, I was trying to peek over the wall. I was curious. And I actually found out. So I was sentenced to the youth authority for a period of time. And then when I got out, I went into high school, and when I got out of the youth authority, I'd lost all that baby weight, and I've been lifting weights. So suddenly, I wasn't that fat little kid anymore, I was a 14-year-old with a really horrible, shitty attitude. And then off to high school we went. I sold drugs in high school, and I was a cheerleader. I was covering my bases. Started drinking pretty regularly then, in combination with drugs. Mostly beer. Not so much hard liquor, but mostly beer. And of course, in those days, we were all drinking these really horrible fortified wines that were super sweet, super cheap. And, and Pagan Pink and Red Mountain, you could buy a gallon for like $1.99 or something stupid. And, so all through high school, that was the pattern. Getting drunk on the weekends and then showing up at school drunk and, and high. And
what kind of feelings were you chasing with that? Did you have a particular way you wanted to feel when you were drinking or smoking dope?
I liked the feeling, the freedom that I felt, because it was a new experience and it was really different and it felt unique and it felt like it was only mine. I liked the idea that it was my experience, that I wasn't being told to experience something. Does that make any sense?
It does. Were your friends at the time complicit in that behavior, or were you all hanging together, or were you on the fringe?
Because I had split my attention between the goody goods and the baddie bads. You know what I mean? I had a little equal dose of everything. So it just allowed me, it gave me a confidence. I didn't have problems with either one. And it allowed me to feel like I had skills that I probably didn't have, but it made me feel like I could navigate in those kind of situations. And that problem with that is that it encourages you to take more risks.
Sure.
And, and of course, it was a lot easier to take more risks on the bad side than the goody side.
Yeah.
When I finally managed to graduate after high school, most people go into the service or go to college. I went to prison.
How did you end up in prison?
Well, I got arrested.
Yeah, I get that, but what were you doing?
I got caught. I was selling drugs.
Yeah.
I was approached because I had been selling drugs for a couple of years, and I was approached to do something. And I said, sure, I can do that. And then based on the theory that I'd figure out how to do it. And I figured out how to do it. And it turned out that the whole thing was a setup. Because back in those days, drugs were looked on, like a capital.
Sure.
Crime. We were, it was severe.
Were these the harder drugs?
LSD. I like the mind things. I didn't like the downer drugs. I like things that pep me up or make me see shit.
So you get caught by the police or the undercover, whatever. What were your options at that point? Did they give you any options of jail and or some other option?
No, there was no talk of diversion or anything else to do. So I got the lawyer that I could afford and took a plea deal. Plea deal was 5 to life. In those days, they didn't give determinate sentences; they were indeterminate. So they could keep you as long as they wanted. And off I went. Turned 19, 20, and 21, like the song says. And after 4 years, I got out. And, the interesting thing was, we made booze in jail.
Yeah.
We were making this god-awful Pruno, this horrible hooch with fruit juice and stuff. But, we would drink it because, for me, I look at that period, it was like the first time in my life that I had a chance to reflect back and look at my life and see what it is that was going on and what I wanted, what I was going to do. And just, you kind of plucked out of your life and put on hold.
What did you see when you were looking back on that, Jimmy?
When I wanted to get out, I had this vision that life was going to be different. I was not going to go back to East LA. I was going to get a place in the country, with a little porch, and get a girlfriend who sings like Joni Mitchell and bakes bread, and I just sit on the porch and she'd sing and bake, and I'd play guitar, and it'd be wonderful. The problem is like a lot of people, I only think about that part. I don't go, well, first I should get a job and save my money so that I can accomplish it. I just want to skip right to the part where I'm sitting on the porch. There's no, how do you get there in my mind? Well, you know what happened when I got out? It was different for about a half an hour.
Okay.
And then I was at the liquor store.
Did you get back involved with what caused your incarceration to begin with the drugs, or did you stay away? How did you handle that?
I did get involved with drugs, but of course, at that time, the drugs had changed. Okay. It was mostly marijuana. And then 5-6 years later, when cocaine hit, I was definitely a candidate for cocaine. That drug was, they had me in mind. And, and I didn't put up much of a fight.
While you were in prison for those 4 years, was anything offered to you that could be considered enriching for a better life coming out?
I was just in jail until the last 3 months, and I got transferred to a program that let me go to the local junior college for 3 hours a day. There was about a dozen of us. We were kind of an experimental program, and we'd come on the prison bus. They'd drop us off, and of course we were a bit of an oddity. But it was great to be around people again, and especially around girls.
Did that get you started wanting to go back to school, or when you got out, you just left that behind?
It made me want to go to school, but more than anything, I wanted to make money. And I finally just took what I learned and I found a small job, working in a print shop. doing some of the stuff that I had learned in college. And that gave me a chance to earn a living. I was getting like $100 from the state. And $100 a month doesn't go very far.
Now, were you living on your own at the time or with family?
No, I had left the family the day after I graduated from high school. I had gotten involved in politics at the time too, and I got arrested on TV. And my parents sitting home watching the news, and they're dragging me across the street, and that was it for me in the house. My mother was fine, but my father, he didn't know what to do.
Was that anti-war?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were part of that whole thing.
Yes, and this was at Cal State Fulton. I went to several colleges.
Oh, okay.
I just never went to class.
How'd that work out for you? Or need I ask?
It turned out it worked out pretty well.
In what way?
And serendipitously, unbeknownst to me, I met a guy at USC that was a teacher there. We became really good friends. A fellow by the name of Leo Buscaglia. And I don't know if you're familiar with Leo, but
he wrote the books about loving, right?
Yeah. And something about Leo it was one of the first time I had ever met a person in my life that you sensed something special and wonderful about. Not suspect, not that. It's just something about this guy. And, Leo and I became good friends. And, I went to his class for all the wrong reasons. But, Leo was instrumental. I managed to get a parole hearing, and Leo wrote an impassioned letter to the parole board about me and was really instrumental in getting me released early, because I was released earlier than that 5-year minimum sentence. So, things were already happening for me that were helping me, but I didn't realize or sense that things were going my way.
Jimmy, did you get a sense of a divine intercedence going on there, that something bigger than you was making that whole thing happen with Leo and with getting paroled early, or did you just pass it off as just nothing special?
Yeah, I passed it off. One of the nice things about the gift of sobriety is it's given me an opportunity to look back at those things and see the things that I wouldn't even say callous. I disregarded without any thought or feeling at all. No sense of appreciation or anything. It's just always on to the next thing.
Yeah. Never
going, boy, I dodged a bullet there. Wasn't this fortunate? You slap yourself on the back and figure, I'm the golden boy. So of course things are going my way. Realize that there's all these other forces, not to mention that there's all these other people that are trying to help me. I never saw that.
Did you sense that your life was starting to turn around or about to be turning around when you had this relationship with this man who sounds like he was kind of a mentor to you, or at least a friend?
No, because I saw Leo before I went to prison. I never saw him after that. He wrote the letter. I didn't even find out about the letter until about a year after that. And Leo and I just never reconnected. I stayed up in Northern California, and Leo was still down here. So we never connected after that.
So he was one of those anonymous angels out there, wasn't he?
I think that's a great way of putting it.
So we're talking about you in your early 20s, and you didn't come into AA until you're 50.
Yep. Yeah, I was 48, I think.
Okay, so what did the intervening 28 years look like?
A lot of different jobs, a lot of different schemes. I played music, and so I got involved in music and played in bands and did those things and wrote music and did that. I had a sign shop for a few years.
I see.
And I liked that because I've always been kind of artistic. I was trying to be your basic artist musician. Sure. And the problem is that I needed to support my alcohol and my drug habit. I needed a steady income. So I kept trying to find jobs. I sold swimming pools. That was horrible. I worked at a car dealership. Right. That was terrible. The best part was after, every night you'd pick up a different car and go to the bar. That was the best part about that job. And I had gotten to a point where I really needed a job, but I didn't know what to do. And I had a friend of mine who owned a winery. So I asked him, and I got a job working at the winery. Working is what they call a cellar rat. You do all the shitty jobs about making wine, so you move the hoses and you wash out the tanks and you punch down grapes. And during harvest, you run a forklift and the crusher and all that stuff. And I did that for probably 3 or 4 years. And I liked that because I worked by myself lots of times, and I'd be in a big old winery and the bats would be flying around.
Wow.
And I'd be doing my job and I'd have the stereo blasted and drinking wine and having a great old time, One day I was working the crush. It was about 110 and I was covered in grape juice and sticky and wet and tired and miserable. And just then their broker walked out onto the crush pad where we were working. And as I recall, when he walked out, there were like little rays of light shining from him. And he was clean and he just had a nice lunch. And he had half a heat on for drinking wine. And I went, screw this. I want to be that guy. I don't want to be this guy. So I went to the owner and I begged him every day for like 6 weeks. Let me go sell wine. No. Let me go sell wine. No. And finally, he said, you can go out 2 days a week. So I did that. And, I went to a place, and as little as I knew, I went to a restaurant at lunchtime to sell him wine.
Smart idea.
And the guy goes, why don't you come back after lunch? And I did. And, the guy spent a lot of time with me and taught me a lot about what was going on. And I realized it was one of those things that you hear your brain go, if you can shut up and listen, you learn how to do it. And it turned out I was really good at it because if you look at my life, my primary job skills were drinking and bullshitting.
Yeah.
And what is sales? But essentially bullshitting. So this was a job that was made for me. We drank wine all day. You drank wine with customers.
Wow.
I always had plenty of samples. And I spent 20 years doing that until the alcohol really stopped working for me. And I started, things started to change,
Yeah.
My world started to get smaller and I didn't see it happen.
Yeah.
And I know that now from what I've learned about alcoholism, but it was getting harder and harder to get out of the house. And all this time, this 20 years, I was having blackouts and I was losing the car and stuff and, making an idiot out of myself. But I always managed to keep the job. I managed to get thrown out of the bands because I was unemployable anymore. And my relationships had all gone to hell. I got married. And that poor woman, trying to keep up with my drinking. It's a wonder she didn't die. So, but, I just kept drinking and I didn't sit. That time I was married actually with her for 4 years. We were married 5 years. It was destined for failure.
Yeah.
I got married because I thought I should get married. Oh, it's time. And I cheated on her the night before the wedding. So what kind of husband does that? That's the kind of guy I was. And the worst part about it is that Howard, is that I didn't feel bad. I thought I was slick. I thought I was smart. I thought I was really, really had this game, and I was really, controlling my own destiny and making stuff happen. And I look back now and I realize, oh my God.
Yeah. What was that, the alcohol-addled part of your personality that was showing up at that point? Or did you still think you didn't have a problem?
I didn't think I had a problem. It's the usual things, there are certain consequences to certain actions, For some reason, I had the ability to look at hangovers and that stuff as part of the territory. They didn't scare me. You know what I mean? I knew I was going to feel like shit sooner or later, and you knew how to deal with it. And it's like I just kept doing that and taking the consequences. I suffered from one serious problem that I think might have helped, and I don't know if that's true or not, but all those years, I never got a DUI. Not one.
I was going to ask you about that. It sounds to me like you were drinking every single day. I was wondering, how could someone do that?
I was drinking every day.
Yeah.
I had a set of wine glasses for the car, for Christ's sake. I drank every day. And I look back at this and I explain it to people now that, it doesn't mean that I was a fabulous driver. It just meant that I just didn't get caught. It's as simple as that. It's just like, being in prison and you go, what are you in for? and you tell them, and then somebody says, isn't it great you're only here for that and not all the other things that you've done? If I would have been in prison for all of the stuff I'd done, I'd still be there. So, it was one of those things that...
Well, it's amazing you're alive. And
that's one of the funniest things, about this program is that people who had not seen me in a long time, who had met me and then seen me sober, that was generally the first thing out of their mouth. Holy shit, you're alive.
How did that all affect your physical body? That's a lot of years of drinking wine every single day. And what did it do to you physically, or was that not an issue?
It really didn't start catching up to me until I probably was about... after I hit 40, because I'd always spent a lot of time in the gym and, I was still doing those things. But the last couple of years, everything just sort of exacerbated. And I put on a ton of weight. And of course, I was having blackouts. I didn't know anything about alcohol. I never knew anybody who went to AA. None of my friends got sober. My friends either died or moved. Yeah. And I was having blackouts. So you go to the doctor and you go, I'm forgetting shit. He goes, oh my God, we better run a brain scan, And I got the shakes. And it's like, oh my God, do you drink? Well, I drink a little. Does the shaking go away when you drink? No. Well, you must have Parkinson's. So I'm having all these tests. I got brain tests. I'm doing all this shit. Just like it says when we read how it works, all the things we tried. Sure. That's like a checklist for me. I got into exercise. I went to a health farm. I did all of that stuff. Well, I finally decided that I needed to do something because I just had this empty feeling that the world was slowly turning on me. And I wasn't getting any feedback or I wasn't feeling any love from any of my friends. I was feeling like I was there for everybody and nobody was there for me. Yeah. So I went to the winery and I begged them to send me to this wellness program. And I went to this program for 10 days and became vegan. And, I lost a lot of weight and I stayed sober for almost 3 months. Wow. And, it was like, this is fabulous. And of course, like it always says, sooner or later something comes up. And a friend of mine was getting married. I didn't want to go to the wedding because I knew everybody was going to be drinking. I didn't want to be the only guy not drinking. So, in a shot of brilliance, I stayed home and got drunk myself. Yeah. That still got drunk. I just didn't go to the wedding.
That sounds about right. Now, when all this is going on and you're drinking, obviously you're working for a winery. I wouldn't think that they would be the most apt to want to call somebody on their drinking. But did any of your friends or colleagues or anybody else suggest to you that maybe your big problem was the drinking? Sounds like the docs were trying to find ways to let you off the hook with brain scans and Parkinson's, but did anybody ever face you down on that?
Yeah, only one relationship. I had a relationship with a woman that I had known in years before. And she wound up moving in with me with her son. And then she wound up moving out because of my drinking. That was the first time and the only time that I've ever had anybody say there's something there, or that I had an inkling that what I was doing maybe... when you're talking to her and you look over the shoulder and you see her 8-year-old son, I still glossed it over. I still just kept going, that there was something else going on, or that maybe she should help me or something. Because I didn't have any skills with this stuff. I didn't know how to deal with this stuff. And it wasn't until towards the end when I finally did what got me to AA. And, because I had toyed around with it, I'd driven by the fellowship where I lived in Vallejo and seen those guys out there. I'm not a hobo. I still got I got a house. I got a car. Sure, it's in the shop, but, I've got 2 cars. so I could drive the other one. You know, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a bum. Alcoholic was a bum.
Right.
To me.
Right.
I didn't know what I know now.
Mm-hmm.
So it kept me out there longer. And the other thing was that I had managed to get off my cocaine habit. And the fact that I had done that and replaced it with drinking didn't connect. You know, in my mind, I had found the secret to getting cocaine out of my life, because it had run its course and I was sick of it. I just couldn't do it anymore. So I just had to tough that out and make that happen. So that gave me that false sense that I could handle this. I could handle this shit. And the problem I was having was, why can't I handle this shit? I still couldn't figure that out.
Yeah.
You know, because I didn't know what I know now.
Yeah. How long were you doing the cocaine?
I had probably 10 years of getting rid of everything I owned.
To support your cocaine habit. Yeah. So you kicked the cocaine with the idea that the booze is helping you do that?
No, I was still drinking and not seeing alcohol as a problem. You know, it's like when you read the early stories, you know, they talk about, I'm not drinking, I'm only having beer.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's a what? I'm not shooting heroin. I'm just starting cocaine. I'm only drinking tequila.
Yeah, yeah.
and it makes perfect sense.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. So where does the downward slide begin for you till age 48? How many years prior to that did the wheels start to wiggle and start about ready to fall off?
You know, it really was compressed. It was probably only about a year when things suddenly started. You know, I'd always been the golden boy at work, and I got my first bad review, and I couldn't understand it. Why? What had happened? People were saying I had changed, and I know what had happened. I just didn't connect it. I was drinking. I was getting up in the morning and drinking, and it got to the point where, and I'll share this with you. It's not very pleasant, but there towards the end, when I would come to, I'd have to go to the kitchen sink. And I would chug a bottle of wine, a 750 wine. I'd chug that so I could throw it up so I could chug the second one to get it to stay down.
Oh, man.
That's how I was drinking. That's how I was starting what we were calling my day. And it did not seem, I didn't see anything wrong with it. It just did nothing seemed wrong about it.
Wow.
What gradually started to happen was I started to get these feelings and this fear. When I first went to prison, I used to have a nightmare that I would wake up and I would be back in court, and it hadn't started. And there was that little period where I couldn't differentiate between whether I was dreaming or sleeping. Is this real? Am I dreaming this? And I started to have this dream where I woke up in jail and not knowing why I was there, and having the guard say, "Don't you know you killed a family of 3?" I was terrified I was going to hurt someone. That was always in the back of my mind, because every time I got in that car those last few months, something happened and I wouldn't know what happened. The last time that happened, I got in the car. I don't know where I was going, but I hit something and I don't know what I hit. But I do remember the guy flashing his lights in my rearview mirror. And I know that I'm in trouble and I got to get out of there. So I took off in the car. And we had a little mini car around my neighborhood until I lost it. And then I remember turning up the radio and getting comfortable and thinking I'm hips looking cool again. And I remember seeing these 2 young kids standing on the street corner. And I pulled up to the stop sign and I looked over and, you know, try to be cool, you know, "Hey, sup?" And one little kid looks at me and he says, "Hey, mister, you have 4 flat tires." And I drove home. And for some crazy reason, I got the phone book and opened up the phone book to alcohol. And there was a little bitty ad under alcoholism that said, "Need a miracle?" And I went, yeah. Now I know now at the hindsight why I needed a miracle.
Sure.
One, I was incapable of doing it for myself. But two, I'm lazy.
Sure.
I don't want to do any work. I want to be tapped on the shoulder with a fairy wand and make me better. Solve this alcohol problem. Boom, bam. I need a miracle. That's a quick fix.
Sure.
So I didn't know anything about alcoholism. I didn't know anything about AA, but I called, and you're going to love this. I called a woman that I met at the wellness program and convinced her that I needed to go to rehab because that's all I knew.
Right.
Everybody that had a problem with drugs and alcohol went to rehab. Well, obviously that's what I need. Now, I never knew anybody who went to rehab, but that sounds good. I need to be rehabbed. You know, that's where they take the old parts out and put new ones in and make you all better and pat you on the ass. I called her up, and she belongs to that program where it's nobody's fault.
Right.
And so she convinced her husband to drive down to take me and pour me into this rehab center. And they dumped me off there. I had a couple of drinks on the way. And then I detoxed for like 3 days.
Wow.
And I remember waking up occasionally and hearing the two guys, because they have somebody watch you so that you don't have a seizure. And they're going, "What do we do if he wakes up?" "I don't know. You run for help and I'll try to keep him here." And on that third day, shaking like a leaf, I went to my first 12-step.
Wow.
Yeah. It was an NA meeting, and I saw the steps for the first time in my blurry eyes. And after the meeting, this little heroin addict came up to me and gave me a big hug and his phone number and told me to keep coming back and that he loved me. And I knew right then and there that I'd made a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
And I had to get the hell out of there because I'm not joining some damn cult.
Yeah. So this is how long into the treatment program did that happen?
This is the fourth day. And man, this is the fourth time in, in what, 35, 40 years that I have not been drunk or high.
Wow.
And I can barely walk. I'm shaking like a leaf. I can hardly hold a cup of coffee. But there was a counselor there who was a pretty intuitive guy. And I know now that he was just one of us. But he knew how to get to me. And he made it pretty clear that I could leave anytime I want. They weren't going to drive me. I was out in the middle of nowhere. I sure as hell wasn't going to walk. But I could leave, But I knew as much as I was fighting that I wanted to go, that all I was going back to was the same thing.
I see.
More of the same.
Yeah.
So I decided to stay. And then he said something to me that he says, "Listen, you've been faking it your whole life." And of course, I was incensed that anybody would accuse me of not having integrity, even though I had no integrity and I have been faking it my whole life. He goes, "Why don't you just fake it till you make it?" I go, "What the hell are you talking about? Why don't you act as if? Act as if what? Act like you believe this stuff." And I go, how disingenuous is that? He goes, "What have you got to lose?" And the reality of it is that I had a chance to sort of talk to some people and look at my life and see that there was definitely something wrong.
Sure.
There was definitely something wrong.
Yeah.
So, and then something miraculous happened. I went to a meeting, I think it was at fifth day, and a guy stood up there who I had seen a movie of and some TV footage of. He was a newscaster up in the Bay Area and had gotten drunk on the air. And then they were interviewing him in his car 6 months later, and, and he got fat and lost everything, and identified with this guy. So here we are, we're at the meeting, this AA meeting on like the sixth day, and here's this guy standing in front of me. And he says, when I would start my day, I'd grab a bottle of wine and I'd chug it over the sink so I could throw it up so I could get the second one. And I'm like, holy crap. I'd never heard anybody who drank like that. I did. Suddenly, a little switch kicked on.
Wow.
And then I started listening. Here he was. He had gotten a job. He had a cute girlfriend. He was getting a 5-year chip.
Wow.
And he sounded so positive. And most important to me, he didn't sound like I expected him to sound. Yeah. He wasn't swinging a Bible or dancing with snakes, because I saw that God stuff and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah. That old God stuff that that you would have got from a Victorian preacher.
Sure.
And but here this guy was. He seemed halfway normal, and I was excited. And that was the first time that I had a little inkling that it might work.
Wow.
So I went to my room that night, and I got down on my knees, and I said, "Help me." That's the only prayer I said. And I don't know where it went. I don't care where it went. I didn't know where I thought it was going. I just said it, and I guess I believed it different than before, because the next day, nothing happened.
Yeah.
Until I went to bed. And just before I went to bed, I realized I had not thought about having a drink all day.
That's amazing.
The first time that I can remember not thinking about having a drink.
Wow.
Or taking a drug or changing the way I feel all day.
That's amazing.
And the next thing you know, it was 2 days. And to be honest, I haven't had a drink since before that, but I haven't had the craving since I said that prayer.
Yeah.
The obsession was lifted from me that very moment. So I just did what they told me to do. They told me to act like I believed all this shit. And, if I had the slightest idea of something else to do, I would have done it. But God bless me, I was so out of gas.
Yeah.
The hook was set, and I just followed along.
So it sounds like you found AA relatively early in the treatment program that you were in.
Yeah.
And then you got what you needed to get from AA that got you to the point where you were on your knees asking for some help. Did you get the sense at any point that maybe you were jumping the gun on the treatment program, and maybe it was the treatment program that was going to get you sober and not so much AA?
No, I got the feeling that I've got the sense, and I still have that sense now, that I don't think if I had gone to treatment, I would have got the program.
Really?
I think it was the ability for the people there to explain to me what I was hearing and what was going on while it was happening and learning about it. That is the thing that doesn't happen as directly and as individually as it did for me then. Because if I had questions, I had things I was bumping up against. But more important, this guy, he knew what I was going through, and he knew how to reach.
Sure.
He knew how to piss me off. He knew how to challenge me. And he also instilled in me the fact that if I wanted to do this, that the only way this was going to work is if I did this stuff. And when people would relapse or leave that program, I used to cheer. Not because I was happy to see them go. It just meant that I was still here.
Yeah.
Because they always tell you, well, 3/4 of you people are not going to make it. And every time somebody went down, I'm like, hey, not me. Not me, man. I'm going to keep going. I was terrified I was going to drink again.
How long were you at the treatment center?
30 days, man. It's been dry. Just enough to be convinced.
Okay, so were you going to meetings on the outside, or were these all interior meetings where people were coming in from group?
Yeah, they had meetings there every day, in addition to the classes and the stuff. So there was always an AA or an NA meeting there.
Right.
Brought in from outside. So, you got to see how the meeting works, but you got to understand the process and all those things as you're going through working steps 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
It saved me from trying to decipher what was up there, because I struggled with some of that stuff.
Yeah.
My counselor gave me the NA workbook at the time because I had a drug problem, I was an equal opportunity abuser. I went to both fellowships for a while, but I answered the NA workbook like it was alcohol. And by answering those questions, I wasn't left to my own device or my own imagination about how to answer those questions and participate in my sobriety. Mm-hmm. They forced me to answer and find a way to make my life fit the question. Mm-hmm. It was always, if you don't think this applies to you, find a way to make it apply to you. Yeah. And because of the way that worked for me, that gave me the ability to understand what I was doing, why I was doing it, and to do it correctly. Right. And that continued when I went to my sponsor when I got out of the recovery, after I finally took a sponsor. That took a while too.
So they're directing you out the door of the treatment center immediately to AA. Did you go immediately?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you went immediately. And what were your first meetings like out there?
They were great. I was excited to be there. Uh-huh. You know what I mean? I wanted to learn. I wanted to meet people. Mm-hmm. And of course, I knew all about AA. But, I was excited to be there. And, it wasn't that mentality, why don't you shut up and listen? It was like, well, thank you. We're glad you're here. Uh-huh. And I got a commitment right off the bat.
That's cool.
And I kept trying to get a sponsor. I'd raise my hand every meeting I went. Says, my name's Jimmy. I need a sponsor. Yeah. And it took me 6 months to get somebody to say yes.
Okay. So if somebody finally said yes, and were you attempting to do any of the steps prior to that, or?
No, I wasn't. I was just going to meetings and reading a book, and I had gotten a recovery Bible too. Uh-huh. So I was trying to do that end of it, trying to figure out the higher power thing. Get it. I got a guy who said, I'll be your temporary sponsor. Uh-huh. And he was my sponsor till he passed away. So, he stayed temporary, but, at least we got through the steps and allowed me to, keep doing what it is that I've been doing ever since.
Did you ever feel when you were getting out of the treatment center, I've known people over the years who have slipped, and looking back on their experience with treatment centers, they get the sense that once they get it figured out in there, that maybe they've got it totally figured out, and they get out and they'll go to a few meetings and then they kind of drift away. What was it about AA that kept you wanting to come back to those meetings in the early days?
It's just going to sound rather egotistical, but I kept asking that, I said, listen, this is great. We all can stay sober here. Anybody can be a monk at a monastery. Right. Can you get me back to my life? Is this stuff going to work out there? Because I wasn't sure it was going to work. I was sure it was going to work, while I'm around here, I'm in an AA meeting, but how do I take this out to work? How do I translate this to my job? And, and again, there's another one of those little miracles. I went to work after I got out of rehab, and the work was very supportive. When I went to rehab, they said, just take care of yourself and we'll keep paying you. You do what you need to do it. And, and we'll talk when you get back. And I went back to the winery and sat down and told them, that I was back and I felt really good in what I had done and that I was committed to not drinking anymore. And I was here to go to work. And they fired me because they said, if you can't drink, you can't work here. I go, that doesn't make any sense. That's the stupidest thing I had ever heard of in my life.
A requirement for the job, huh?
Well, they were convinced of that.
Yeah.
They fired me. I mean, they gave me 6 months severance. That's generous. I've been there 10 years. Yeah. I mean, looking back, it wasn't legal, but it was the best thing. So now I had nothing to do but work on my sobriety. I had nothing to do but go to meetings. My bills were paid. I just had this chance to focus on myself. And, I did that for about close to 9 months.
Was AA, in the winery's point of view, were they the enemy, or did they just not like the fact that you weren't going to be drinking while you were on the job?
They were convinced that the only way that I could sell the wine is if I could talk about the wine from a first person's perspective.
Yeah.
Not realizing that I said the same bullshit every time, regardless what it was. It's prose.
Yeah, I get it.
It's like Siskel and Ebert giving you the same review for every movie.
So this is within your first year. You get your sponsor at 6 months. Did he get you started on the steps right away? And how long did it take you to work through the 4th and 5th and then the 8th and 9th until you became of service?
We got everything done. We were probably done 8 months. I was done before I had that first year.
That's great.
And I procrastinated a little bit on that 5th step. The problem was I was trying to be so thorough, and because of my age, I had a lot of shit that I had tucked away.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd think about something that had happened, and then it would remind me of something else.
Sure.
And something else and something. It was the proverbial peel in the onion. You know, one thing always led to another. Yeah. And I was convinced that if I wasn't thorough, that it wouldn't work. Because that's what they told me. It's like, okay, if I'm going to believe this shit, I'm going to believe it.
Right.
Because if it doesn't work and I've been thorough, then I can at least complain about that.
Yeah, I get that.
And there were some things on my list that I was going to take to my grave. There are some things that I had done in my life, of being a reprobate and a criminal, that I was not proud of. And they're not things that I would share with anybody. But I shared them with that man and with God. It took so much of the shame away.
Yeah.
You know, and it was such a burden lift.
It sounds like it.
And with the understanding that those were just the things that I did.
Sure.
They weren't who I was.
I'm glad to hear you say it in that way, because it's about what we did, not who we are right now, because we're different now than we were. In the first, okay, so you worked your steps and you worked with a sponsor, let's say to about 1.5 years or so, until you had all the steps done?
Yeah, and we kept in contact for many years. And I mean, you know, because he was local, and you know, I started getting sponsees, and you know, we do that thing. I got sponsees before I finished the steps.
Really?
Because we had people from rehab calling me, and it's like, well, okay, I'll try, you know. And, you know, I learned a couple of valuable lessons in those early days, you know.
Yeah.
That it's not my job to keep them sober.
Yeah.
You know, it's just my job to help them go through the steps.
It's hard not to feel bad when a guy that you're working with doesn't get it. I mean, I know that the sign of success in sponsorship is when the sponsor stays sober, but it's still hard not to take it upon yourself that maybe I could have done something else, but that's an illusion.
But my first sponsee cleared that up for me. I saw him, and then I lost track of him for 3 months.
Yeah.
And then I happened to bump into him while he was sitting in his car drinking. And of course I asked him, well, what happened? And he looked at me and says, I'm an alcoholic. What do you think happened? And I went, God, how did I forget that?
That's the right answer to that question. That
was the perfect lesson. You know, he solved that problem.
Isn't that amazing? We're talking about your first couple of years. Fast forward, say, the first 10 or even 15 years. What were some of the major milestones in your sobriety that you can look back on and say, thank God I was in AA, thank God I was sober, or you've talked about some miracles that have happened for you. Can you speak about a few of those types of events in the succeeding years? Yeah,
I think I didn't know what I was going to do for a living because I had been in the wine business 20 plus years. What the hell am I going to do? You know, I'm almost 50, you know, I'm not exactly. And I got a call from a guy who had given me one of my first jobs in the wine business. He had hired me with my criminal record. And how he knew I needed a job, I don't know. But he called me up and he says, I got a job. And I said, I got to tell you something. He goes, what is it this time? And I go, I don't drink. And he goes, well, I never hired you for your liver. I thought that was remarkably insightful. So after a lot of soul searching and a lot of prayer and meditation, I went back to work in the wine business. And I've been working in the wine business ever since. I still work for a winery today. You know, if there isn't an accomplishment to work around something that ruled your life, like alcohol did, and still be able to be part of it. And it's given me the opportunity to help other people in this industry because people notice things. And I'm not shy about telling people, you know, if they ask, why I don't drink. And so that's been one huge miracle. It's allowed me to continue a career that I thought I had no business being in. I thought it was over. The other thing is that it's taught me to deal and become realistic about dealing with the pain and the grief in my life. You know, I got married again. And my second wife was in the program. And we had a wonderful relationship. When I was traveling for my work, I was on the road, 200 days a year.
Yeah.
And going to meetings all over the country and doing what I do. And then I'd come home and it'd be fabulous. And I went from traveling all the time to not traveling at all.
Yeah.
And we grew apart. And we got an amicable divorce because we realized we just sort of morphed into roommates.
Yeah.
She eventually relapsed.
Oh, no.
And, I was able to be there for her grown daughters. And tried to be there for her. She eventually drank herself to death.
Oh, sorry.
Alcohol took her. And she's not running anymore, I'm convinced that there was something in her past that she had never been able to get out. Now, I don't know why I feel that way. I had that sense, And, I was able to deal with that. And, I've lost several of my good, close friends to alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest one was one of my good musician friends who drank himself to death on purpose. And I remember seeing him the day before he died, and I remember crying. And he said, "Don't be sorry for me. I did this to myself." And I tried to explain to him, that's why I'm crying. What I mean? He couldn't find anything at all in the world to tether himself here. No reason at all to stick around. Not for his kids or his music. Super talented, great guy. Everybody loved him. But he just, fuck it, I'm going to die. And he did. And, it reminds me how grateful I am. The real big one is, when we've moved down to the desert here a few years ago, and I have that little piece of land that I used to dream about in prison. I got a wife with a fabulous voice who cooks.
That's great.
There's music coming from the house. And one day I was sitting there going, that dream came true. That dream came true. I didn't see it happening. I just did the next right thing. I did what was in front of me and, try to become a worker among workers and, try to be of maximum service to the world and pass this message on.
Yeah.
When you look at that, those are the things that move me.
Yeah. Sounds like you stay pretty much in the middle of the program, too. People that I've known who have slipped after getting the kind of comfort that you're talking about usually do so because something about that, whatever they've achieved or whatever they've been able to accomplish in their lives professionally or in relationships or financially, start to become their higher powers, or they start to take credit for that which they should not be taking credit for. How did you manage to stay responsibly humble? And I'm not suggesting that you're Mr. Humility, but how did you stay away from that kind of mindset?
I didn't.
Really? Okay.
I had a period about 10 years in where I was focused on work and I was going to meetings, but I wasn't. I was going, but I wasn't going, if you know what I mean. I'm at the meeting, but I'm thinking about something else. I have always had a very volatile temper. Even as a little kid, I overreact. In second grade, I put a kid in the hospital. That temper, that shortness started to come out, and it came out at work. I handled a situation like drunk Jimmy would have handled it. Almost threw one of our better customers down the stairwell.
Oh, my gosh.
So everybody knew that there was something up. I knew there was something up because I didn't see myself getting that squirrely. But when I did, I knew exactly what it was. When I finally saw it, that ugly glare of what was happening. And, so I went to the meetings and I knew what we were taught to do. I went in and told on myself. I told everybody what had happened. And, excuse me, I'm not Mr. AA. Or whatever you think, this is what I'm going through, and this is what happened. And I threw myself back into my program. And that's buoyed me to get back to where I need to be. Just like Zoom did. Zoom invigorated my sobriety because you only have a couple of meetings a week to choose from. This, like you said, I was hungry for more. And I wanted different. Fresh meat. I hate to use that phrase, but I want to hear some new stories from some new people. I love the people I got sober with, but I'd like to meet some new people. So I started going to meetings all over the country and all over the world. and settled on a few that I really felt comfortable and dropped some others. And the combination of that and the other work that I do at the local Marine base, has just given me the opportunity to be around different kinds of sobriety and then be around no sobriety.
Yeah, and be of service in both places.
Yeah, I when I go to my meetings at the Marine base, you're not at that meeting unless somebody told you have to go to this meeting. This is not a lot of happy guys.
So you don't have a willing group of people.
No, we do not, because,
it's like going to those prison meetings, right?
They're young. They're all full of piss and vinegar. They can't believe this is an unfortunate mistake.
Yeah.
So it gives me the chance to, at the very least, if I can educate them about their alcoholism, I can educate them about alcoholism, because, they're going to marry one. Right. Their kid's going to be one, or they might have a father one. So it just gives me a chance to really be at a basic level to explain how these things work and how the program works. And I enjoy that, because to me, that's the key to it. If you can't explain, you can't give the guy the book like they did 40 years ago, go, here, read this, then come back when you're done with the steps.
Sure.
That's great. Left your own device, maybe you could do that. But I think the way that we work now, with more direct contact, people asking questions, sponsors, and even newcomer meetings where they explain some of this stuff. You don't know when you're supposed to raise your hand, who to talk to, what to do. It's like being dropped into a third year's Chinese class, and they go, you'll catch up. What? No.
It is an easier and softer program than it was even 33 years ago when I came in, or 20 when you came in. I'm so glad when you stop and think about it, Jimmy, you and I are just maybe 3 generations into this thing. And that still blows my mind that my dad was a teenager when Bill Wilson was starting AA. And I'm thinking, I'm second generation, I'm thinking, wow. But it also reminds me to stay grateful and to stay humble and to stay appreciative of people like you. I mean, this has been so marvelous for you to take the time and do this. Everybody I've interviewed so far has been an enlightening experience for me, and everybody I've talked to who's listened to the interviews have said it's nothing but helpful and it's nothing but good stuff. Again, I want to thank you for doing this, and I love you. You're a beautiful man, and I'm looking forward to going to many, many more meetings with you, man. We're friends now. We got to do that, right?
Howard, I enjoy you. I can listen to those dulcet tones.
Dulcet tones.
On and on.
Well, Jimmy, I'm going to let you fly, brother. Thank you so much again for doing this, my friend.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Aaron. Love you.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Think of it as a little AA service that spreads the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience. It's yet another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. Visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, where you can listen to every episode of AA Recovery Interviews. And if you want to contact me directly with any comments or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next new episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.